Hi folks, Tacitus today here at your Pushback channel. We hope you find this video informative, and while you're with us, please take a moment to subscribe below. This essay is about forced mass migration to the West from the Third World. Why are the political elites doing this? Let's look at some of the possible reasons. We need to accept the Western political elites are fully committed to forcing masses of immigrants into the West, and immigrants with very low possibilities of assimilation. And the political establishment are doing all this without the consent of the governed. Indeed, they are pushing ahead with mass immigration to the West as if the existing Western population barely existed at all. The extent and depth of this commitment, indeed the fact that it is seen by the elites as an urgent priority of the first order, is illustrated by the unswerving limpet-like adherence from both major political parties in, say, Britain, including, from the 1990s, Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair, Conservative Party Prime Minister David Cameron, and now Conservative Party Prime Minister and former Home Secretary Theresa May. David Cameron openly talked about easy pathing Muslims into Parliament and into the apex of business and the public service, with an emphasis on creating Muslim propaganda poster characters, all at British taxpayer expense. Other than international financial houses and starry-eyed SJW uni kids, almost no one in Britain wants this mass immigration, and certainly not the immigration from those areas least likely to integrate into British society, and who wish to openly repudiate British values and to celebrate the trashing of British culture. Yet in the context it is used, multiculturalism seems to be nothing more than code speak for white middle class and working class to become a minority in their own country or all formerly white majority nations. Interestingly, the British political elite seem prepared to accept almost any level of collateral social damage in pursuit of this unexplained objective, particularly where it concerns Muslim immigration. They are prepared to pay any price, even to turn Britain into a virtual authoritarian police state in pursuit of the so-called multicultural objective. Much the same thing could be said of some of the other European countries, such as Sweden. Yet this is clearly a policy being decided at a level above that of the nation-state body politic. Astonishingly, the allegedly independent Fourth Estate media are active participants in this quest for multiculturalism. No talk-it-up propaganda is too far-fetched, and no denunciation of multiculturalism's detractors can be too excessive. In mainstream media, not a single voice expresses even a smidgen of doubt about this multicultural path or how usefully it is being managed and handled. Anyone who questions it is a fascist bigot, and the most vocal detractors suffer harassment by the politicised organs of the state, which include dawn raids on homes, forensically intensive tax audits, and a constant barrage of coordinated media hit pieces. It's hard to believe such authoritarian goings-on are occurring in Britain or anywhere in Western Europe, but occurring they are, and on a scale that would be considered unimaginable 20 years ago. But the big question is why? Why mass forced multiculturalism and immigration? Why choose immigrants from areas least likely to integrate, even after 3, 4 or 5 generations being born in Europe? And then the increasingly frustrated and paranoid authorities harass and terrorise the local white citizenry if any disagree with an immigration none of them wanted in the first place, never voted for, and clearly isn't working. And all this while virtually ignoring the many real crimes of migrants who are openly and defiantly rejoicing in their crowning achievements of muscular non-assimilation. The cost in national social trust alone should cause any politician who genuinely represents the voting public to openly express concern and to ask probing questions. But no one publicly questions these ruinous policies, as the priority is an ideological attachment to some greater future good that they seem unable to articulate and sell to the voters, yet are rabidly determined to apply by force. The silly and idiotic propaganda lines of diversity is our strength, and we are all migrants, and we are all black, and we need the workers, ageing populations and so on, are simply arrant nonsense of the first magnitude. Whatever the real reasons for forced mass migration might be, the Western bodies politic are not going to tell us. So whatever the real answer is, they seem certain it will not be enthusiastically received by the public or they would be out selling it as an easy sell right now. So what are the possible reasons for the elites forcing unwanted multiculturalism on an unwilling population? Having scoured the web, the following are among the more plausible and possible theories. So let's try and unravel this madness of multiculturalism to which only white majority nations are to be subject, and this is just the insanity of our times. So here are 9 theories to consider, or 9 reasons if you like. The white nation elites, and particularly financial elites, accept that Western white national wealth and power is declining relative to the newly developing and very populous nations such as China and India. Within the next 30 years or so, many prognosticate the West will be a much lesser player on the world stage than today. The newly powerful nations, such as China and India in the future, may want revenge on the West. So, in a form of begging forgiveness in advance, particularly the Western financial elites, 90% of all big international financial houses are from majority white nations. They are prepared to sacrifice white nation citizens by giving away white citizen jobs, and in the hope of the newer nations that are acquiring economic and military power will have their appetites sated by being given all this Western wealth and Western jobs and Western real estate. And so in the end we'll leave the white financial elites, the guys at the top, intact and unmolested in their oligopolies positions of profit taking. As an added cover, the financial elites, in conjunction with their flunkies in parliaments all over the West, are bringing in black and particularly brown folks from all over the world into the West until whites are a minority. The hope is the soon-to-be powerful nations will then not disadvantage or attack these former white nations, as brown folks are in the majority anyway. This theory is far-fetched in some respects, but it's also got its plausible aspects and has some historical examples, such as medieval monarchs and aristocrats often would happily sell out their own people just to stay in power and keep their own wealth and privileges intact. Also, when we look at how many of the Western political elites, relatives and mistresses and so on, are given exceptionally well-paid jobs in the financial sector and then themselves receiving superbly well-paid consulting roles when they leave politics. Theory or possible cause or reason number 2, the Western financial and political elites wish to dismantle democracy. Democracy no longer serves their purpose and is seen as a hindrance, as is the rule of law, other than the rule of law that involves state compulsion and coercion. And most definitely due legal process is a hindrance. It's all got to be got rid of. But how to do it? How to get rid of democracy and close its underpinning Western values out without looking like they're actually doing it? The most effective ways is to neutralise democracy. So like the Soviet republics, democracy exists in name only. Electoral candidates are chosen for their simple-minded compliance. All main political parties bark for the same paymaster. New political parties are hatcheted and jobbed by in-on-the-act media and any other political centres of power that threaten the arrangement. Those party leaders suddenly find gigabytes of highly inappropriate material has magically appeared on their computers just as the police are coming in the front door with a warrant to search. So it's not difficult to close down other political parties. We've seen it going around in the West over the last 10, 15, 20 years or so. Importing large numbers of non-assimilating migrants and permanently accusing the local majority whites of being racist and committing vague hate thought crimes, then allowing the full force of arbitrary authoritarian law to cower all those who would fight for democracy and its attendant principles. By creating and exploiting this racial division, this imported racial division, democracy will have no protectors and can just quietly be euthanized. Moreover, controlling the population requires monitoring and spying and informing. That is a big task. A homogenous population with shared values is very likely to make common cause against this authoritarianism, whereas a divided community will be much less likely to defy and oppose. Keep them divided and denouncing each other makes for much easier state control. Moderate authoritarianism, or as much authoritarianism as is necessary for the elites to do what they want without unwanted or unexpected obstacles. Moderate authoritarianism with a sham democracy veneer is shaping up as the preferred model for evolving Western polities trying to transition out of democracy. This theory or possible cause also has its plausible aspects, and many believe is a process already underway in many once robust democracies. If the elites don't get what they want in a first election, they can always call another and another after that until they get what they want. And now even this is viewed as tiresome. Democracy itself is now an obstacle, and anyway, democracy suited those times when the elected representatives actually represented the people and the explainable and clear national interest. The election of Donald Trump and the Brexit election have shown the elites that democracy is too dangerous and must be done away with as quickly as possible. Controlling the media and the public political discourse just isn't enough. There is still a small risk democracy might prevail. The emasculation of democracy now must be total. It is possible democracy may have already gone from Britain. Possible theory number 3. Mass immigration to the West is all about importing cheap labour to work in low-wage jobs, rather than allow the market to set wages where employers compete for workers and pay them whatever wages and conditions are necessary to secure willing and or qualified workers. The government simply imports millions of brown, minimally literate third world people to the West to work at these low-paid jobs, thus keeping wages artificially low in these particular jobs. They could use short-term work visas but instead resort to full-blown immigration or turn a blind eye to illegal immigration, such as Mexican immigration to the United States. Moreover, this allows Western workers with ever-declining purchasing power to access artificially cheap services in areas such as hairdressing and manicuring, factory-made sandwiches and so on. It should be kept in mind that Mexican immigration, legal or not to the US, began to seriously uptick during the Ronald Reagan years. Before the 1980s, Mexican migrations to the US were relatively modest, or certainly compared to today. The type of mass migration we're seeing today also causes a unique form of social underclass in the West. To work at such low-paid jobs, the imported workers must often live 10 to 12 people to a one-bedroom apartment and eat communally just to make ends meet. Welfare is often heavily relied upon, and welfare fraud is widespread at the expense of Western taxpayers. Governments must therefore turn a blind eye to practices very much at odds with Western immigration laws and municipal county laws and accommodation standards. This in turn creates an entire strata of the economy that can only exist by the extreme market artifice of feeding it with peasant workers rather than natural supply and demand market forces. Moreover, such employment practices frequently require the services of shady recruiter middlemen who recruit simple peasants, and notably peasant girls from, say, rural Asia or Africa, to work in the West for slave labour conditions where accommodation and food are part of a pay package that may be less than even half of the minimum mandated wage such workers should be paid. This theory is particularly plausible and consistent with regular Anglo-Saxon bouts of acutely misguided delirium, where the elites think a worker underclass can just be imported en masse from some third world place and kept permanently in position. The danger here is the extent to which, slowly and insidiously, more and more of the Western economies are being drawn into this artificial non-marketplace, so that competitive market forces actually become the feared enemy. As to allow market forces to return to this sector or these sectors of the economy would cause all this artificial substrata economic activity to unwind, which in turn would cause huge convulsions and much economic unrest. Similarly, wherever market forces are squeezed out of the reality, such as we see here, criminal monopolies quickly form. For example, Asian gangs control vast networks of peasant labour hairdressers and beauty salons, ensuring and insisting all purchasing of all goods and all services is purchased from their own wholesalers, and shops are in buildings they own. Workers are sardine housed in apartments they also own. They eat at take-out food stalls and restaurants that they also own, and so on. These businesses do not integrate into the local economy and have no part of it, and they have no intention of doing so. Theory number 4. To create one fully globalised world economy requires all populations of the planet to be brought into one big worker-consumer collective. Whites and most Asians can be drawn into this collective with some moderate success, but black and brown people, particularly Muslims and African people from African basket case economies, are more problematical. Colonialism had some but ultimately minimal effect on fully or even moderately westernising non-white people, other than in insignificant numbers. Handing over billions in Western aid has achieved nothing and may even have exacerbated already eternally simmering tribal tensions and a natural proclivity to petty but deadly respect-type vendettas, along with the omnipresent cronyism and corruption, creating, of course, basket case economies like we see in Africa. Invading Muslim countries and trying to force democracy, such as the case of Iraq, and forcing Muslims to embrace such social advancements as lesbian painting classes has been particularly unsuccessful and utterly counterproductive. The third attempt at creating that one big globalised worker-consumer collective is to move these, or some of these, socially intractable populations into the Western countries and just hope they will be sufficiently westernised, or at very least de-radicalised, and thus be slow-walked into a westernisation situation, and as many Muslims as possible to do this. This effort, and it's classically Western bureaucratic in its construct, looks set to become one of the great miscalculations of history, and not just because it is near guaranteed to be unsuccessful, but it may even tear apart the Western host nations that are trying to de-radicalise these Muslims that have been imported en masse. Possible theory number 5. The Western financial institutions have simply run out of profit frontiers, and they needed new ones. Existing Western consumers were just tapped out with too much debt, and they'd taken on too much debt, and the credit cards were maxed out. New and profitable low-risk oligopoly type opportunities were too few in the West, and the total mass of investment capital was quite high by historical standards. And certainly we see this after during the early 1990s and onwards. So the big financial houses were looking for new opportunities and methods of ensuring low or zero risk profits. So they went to go to third world countries and do the wage arbitrage thing. So that was the reason, and also bringing, of course, masses of migrants into the West to lower costs there. So this is just a big juggling game by the big financial institutions. Theory number 6. What really kicked off globalisation was the fall of the communist regimes in 1991 and China's embracing of controlled capitalism. This brought billions of new illiterate peasant workers into the global pool of workers, but these regions like China and India were very poor and they possessed no substantial or even useful purchasing power. Whereas smaller, less populous European nations such as the Czech Republic and Poland could be brought into the world trading, produce and consume network within a relatively short time frame, but it was going to take a lot longer and take much more effort with the massive populations of China and India and, of course, the basket case economies of Africa. With international finance leading the charge, the decision was made to export Western jobs to China and India to try and pump up their economies and thus create a level of and a wider spread of consumer purchasing power. So just keep on taking jobs and wealth away from the West and Western workers until a form of international purchase and spend equilibrium is achieved between East and West. Now, this will cost Western workers dearly over the first, say, 50 to 75 or even 100 years, but the big financial houses just hope it will somehow all even out in the end, as long as it's not to their cost. Certain jobs and occupations in the West, meanwhile, have been effectively placed in a planned economy scenario where if the wage to be paid to a Western worker reached a certain level, a Western employer could ask for and receive from the government the right to import third world workers so as to artificially lower wages in the West and again bypass market forces. Such practices were cynically disguised as filling a skill shortage, which of course they weren't. Theory 7. The most populous and dysfunctional parts of the globe possess elites desperate to export their surplus populations to just about anywhere else they can. Examples being, say, Mexico, India, Nigeria, and to a lesser extent China, are among that group of nations. The West, with its wealth and welfare, are naturally prime destinations, and also places where migrants, once they've gone to, are unlikely to come back anytime soon. If you pack your surplus population off to another third world country, then they'll be back within weeks. In return for facilitating such population movements and getting rid of those surplus populations, which the Indian and Mexican elites will be happy about and pleased for, the big global financial players in return are receiving quietly arranged favoured access to investment opportunities in those countries and cosy monopoly deals from the government of the people exporters. Theory 8. With so many Western factories and jobs heading offshore to chase cheap wage arbitrage, and with big finance insisting on ever higher guaranteed investment returns from Western governments with things like toll roads, water and energy delivery, commercial real estate development deals and so on, Western nations just can't grow their economies anymore. Wages are stagnant, the essentials and cost of living are rising, and more of the economy becomes services. Productivity gains become ever harder to achieve. Mass migration is thus one of the only remaining options, assuming the self-imposed Western straitjacket is kept in place, one of the few remaining options to grow the total economic mass of a Western nation. This means domestic or housing real estate becomes the nation's biggest export, and offshore buyers, who certainly do not have to work for their money, are offered generous terms to buy up swathes of Western real estate. House prices, for example, in Sydney are inflated by as much as 45 to 55% due to intensive offshore buying, with some buyers acquiring more than 200 freestanding properties in just one suburb of Sydney City. The effect of this is to artificially increase total economic mass by bringing more people in and having them buy lots of real estate, but lowers the per capita wealth of the folks already in that Western nation. Moreover, increasing economic mass by artificially pumping up residential real estate prices does not increase the actual or intrinsic productive wealth of the economy or the nation. Similarly, mass migration artificially lowers wages for many Western jobs, but also means profit and pay rises artificially accrue to the top 0.5% of the population, further exacerbating the reduced purchasing power of the Western worker. This, of course, is a very lazy way to grow an economy that can only ever be temporary, and yet the longer it goes, the longer a Western nation relies on this, the greater the trauma will occur once reality turns and all this artifice unravels. It is a mug's game for Western economies that can't grow by any other means, or refuse to attempt to grow by any other means, because too much Western wealth is being transferred out to the third world nations. Theory number 9, and this is more futuristic. Nanotechnology will change the essence of wealth and how it is accumulated, so wealth will accrue as per total population mass. As whites represent less than 9% currently, at least, of the global population, a number that is slated to decline to a low about 5%. So it's better to populate the white nations now by choice with brown people and some black people in some semblance of orderly transition from majority white to minority white, because it will be imposed on white countries by other nations once that nanotechnology era is arrived at. Mass migration now is just a choice of a lesser evil to avoid what presumed to be a greater evil 30 to 40 years from now. Now, these are just some ideas and some theories that are about on the web that I've accumulated here, but I'd like to see your comments below and see what you think, and see if there's maybe some other theories we can include in a later video. This is Tassos today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening. We hope you found this essay interesting, and take note, you can select any 14 of our essays to be printed in softcover book format. Please order at the email address below. And while you're with us, please take a moment to subscribe below if you haven't already.